The leaders have been around me, have inspired me, taught me, led me, and I've had the pleasure of leading some of them. And so I was asked here today to share some of my thoughts on Army leadership with you. And before we get started, let me start off by saying it's my honor and privilege to be here. I hope the information I bring gives you some insight into Army's leadership, but I hope more importantly, you get to learn about some of the amazing leaders that have influenced my life, the lives of soldiers, and because of that, brought back those soldiers home safely from combat. So slide. I know the slides are a little hard to see. We can can we dim these front lights a little bit? We'll work on that. Anyway, the good pictures aren't until a little bit later, so no worries if you can't see this very well. So the Army has a 188-page book called FM 6-22 on leadership. So I could sit here and give you a summary of that, but that's not what I'm going to do. And honestly, Army leadership is a lot deeper and more complex than what's written in a book. The FM will give you the framework, but it's largely experience that fills in the rest of the proverbial leadership structure. How the Army develops its leaders in reality looks a lot more like this. So slide. Again, a little hard to see, but you can see up there, the Army develops its leaders through multiple avenues. On the top left, you can see their doctrine and books. They tend to be a little bit dry and boring, but it gets the point across. You add in there books written by veterans and reporters, and it can teach you valuable Army lessons through vignettes. The Army does have a recommended reading list also, but how many of those books are actually read by our leaders are largely dependent on the motivation of the individual to improve themselves. So we take what they learn from books, we add in formal schooling like OCS, ROTC, or the military academy, or any of the NCO professional development courses. And they teach things like, administrative type tasks, complex problem solving in reaction courses and through tactical training. Regardless, leaders are rotated through positions, so they understand what it's like to be a leader and a follower as they go through these training courses. Being a subordinate allows you to understand what it feels like not to be in the decision-making loop and the importance of disseminating information. As you continue through your career, you can add in optional schooling like Ranger School or Airborne School. And finally, at some point, the training wheels are taken off and you're thrown into the proverbial fire. Now, if you're lucky, you get some on-the-job training and before you head into combat. Either way, at that point, you primarily learn through what most people call discovery learning. So you kind of throw it out there and it's up to you to figure out the problems you're facing. All of this is underlined by probably the most important part, slide, which is watching and experiencing other leaders. Through all of this, a good leader will be watching the things he likes, paying attention to the things he doesn't like, and how he would act differently, and using that to develop his or her own personal leadership style. So rather than giving you all the details in the FM and all these training courses, I'm going to focus on that very bottom one, watching and experiencing other leaders. And I'm going to drive the point home through a couple of stories from my personal experience that exemplify what I view as great Army leaders. And then I'll also, since we're at the Eisenhower Memorial Library, I'll add in some of Eisenhower's quotes to back up some of the advice and experience I've felt firsthand. So over the course of this brief, I'll be talking about Captain Jonathan Graspa, Captain, now Lieutenant Colonel, Joseph Scott Brannon, a couple of my squad leaders, and then finally Joseph and Shannon Kent. So let's start with John. Slide. Again, a little hard to see, but John's the first true leadership experience I had during my undergraduate at Johns Hopkins University, where I went through ROTC to enter the Army. As a freshman coming into the school and joining the real Army as an ROTC, I was nervous, but one cadet stood out for me from the beginning. His name's Jonathan Graspa. He's a little hard to see there. But he's in a bunch of those pictures. He's all the way in the top left corner as you're looking at it of that slide. So he seemed to be at the top of everything in his class, including tactics, fitness, social skills, and leadership. I define him as someone who leads by example. Over the next couple of years, he would go on to command all three extracurricular activities at our college, including color guard, the tactics scheme called Ranger Challenge, and then a military trick drill squad called Pershing Rifles. I was involved in all three of those. He wasn't only the leader, but the inspiration that kept the group going during the activities as well as during our free time. I can't even count the number of times we saw Black Hawk Down together. Okay, I can. It was 7. We saw it 7 times in theaters, including the last showing in the state of Maryland. And he was the first person to let us know that Master Sergeant Matt Eversman, the main character from the movie, was coming to Johns Hopkins to teach as an instructor. And that was super exciting for us. John graduated a year ahead of me, being commissioned as an armor officer. And despite having a deployment under his belt to Iraq, he continued to mentor us, including coming back to attend the Sandhurst competition, a military competition that's held at West Point. We were allowed to attend as ROTC personnel because we had won Ranger Challenge that year, which was a precedent set by him the year before. Slide. So here's the picture I took with him that day. It's the last picture I have of the two of us. John was killed by an IED on April 7th, 2007 in Iraq, along with 3 of the other 4 soldiers in his vehicle. Slide. As a leader, peer, and friend, John taught me many things, the most important of which are, 1, lead by example, which is what the Army drills into our head from day one. And to me, he's the embodiment of that. You can see on that slide, that's his widowed wife at age 23. And that's his wife getting handed the folded American flag at the funeral. The second thing this taught me was don't take life for granted. He's what provided the initial inspiration for me to continue down the path I'm on today. Eisenhower said, the supreme quality of a leader is integrity. And to me, John embodies that. I've led a busy personal and professional life, as well as a military life. You can see me in my uniform today. When not working, on the side, I race obstacle course racing professionally, and I specialize in ultra endurance, running anywhere from 5 to 24 hours at a time. I run around a 5-mile course with obstacles, climb over things, swing on monkey bars, jump through mud baths, etc. And I've used that to raise money for charity. So I've raised $26,000 over the last 5 years for Folds of Honor. It's a charity organization that does scholarship money for kids whose parents were killed or wounded in action. 3 weeks ago, I was at a mountain in Vermont, and I climbed the height of Everest while doing obstacles, again, to raise money for charity, this time for a charity called Infinite Hero Foundation. And my friend just released a 10-minute documentary about it on YouTube called OCR Everest. So, it's John's sacrifice that has made me want to live the way I do. When people ask me what drives me, it's him. I feel like I need to live 2 lives because he never had the chance to come home safely. Slide. So I talked about peers. I'm going to talk about advisors or superior officers here. So this one's about Captain, who's now a Lieutenant Colonel, but I knew him as a Captain, Joseph Scott Brannon. So I showed up to my first assignment, Bravo 3187 in the 101st, in the summer of 2005 after a lengthy stay in Ranger School. It was 6 months, 3 iterations of Derby phase. Not that I was counting. Instead of getting an apartment, I was told to take leave for a week, come back because the 101st was deploying right away to the cities of Baghdad and Samarra, Iraq. Fast forward 2 weeks and I'm on a plane with a bunch of people I've never met. No train up, no close bonds, just a fresh lieutenant straight out of Ranger School trying to catch up on sleep on the plane ride to Iraq. Yeah, I didn't realize how blessed I was until we moved to the city of Samarra. Over the next 3 months, I learned firsthand what leadership was from my company commander. So here are 3 quick stories from that deployment. Slide. There you can see, it's kind of hard to see there. He's the one in the big center picture, the far right in uniform. And you can see him over there with his head pressed against the radio, upset because some lieutenant is calling him, asking him a dumb question. But so story 1. Talking about mission command. A new platoon leader is out on patrol and encounters an ambiguous situation. It's not me, don't worry. He calls my company commander asking for guidance, and my company commander's reply is something to the extent of, I'm not on the ground, you are. Make a decision, that's why the Army is paying you. The Army would later call this mission command. Leaders give guidance and subordinates execute based on an understanding of the end state, but let the subordinates figure out the details on how that's accomplished. I would take this concept with me throughout my career as I led platoons, a team in 5th Special Forces Group, and eventually a company in 5th Special Forces Group. It's also what made our airborne troops successful during the D-Day invasion of World War II. They didn't need step-by-step instructions. They knew the end state, worked together in small teams once on the ground, and worked together to accomplish the mission. Slide. Story 2. So Samarra is an almost all Sunni city and is home to one of the largest and most important shrines in Shia Islam, the Al-Askari Golden Mosque. If you're not super familiar with Islam, I'd say the Christian equivalent would be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus Christ was crucified, and subsequently the area nearby where his tomb was found empty in Jerusalem. So that's basically the equivalent. On February 22nd, 2006, it was blown up by terrorists. I was awoken from my sleep when it exploded 1 kilometer from our company base. It's kind of hard to say, but you can see that's the mosque right here, that dome. And then here is a flat part where the dome was completely blown off. So our first platoon responded to the event and was quickly withdrawn back to base for fear of riots, and then blaming US soldiers for the destruction of the holy site. Later that day, a senior leader with stars on his chest asked my company commander if he would go secure the site in an amber status. If you're not familiar with military terms, amber status means you have your weapon, but there's no round in the chamber. So if someone shoots at me and I want to shoot back, I have to pull back the charging handle or release the charging handle and then engage. So it adds several seconds to a situation. And if you have to respond, that's an extra 5-10 seconds that you may not have. So he asked us to secure the site in amber status. And I'm guessing his logic was he didn't want a civilian accidentally getting killed during an already sensitive time. To give you some history of Samarra, it's a city where every company before and after us lost 4 or more soldiers. It's the Wild West, and somebody just blew up a major shrine. And they want us to have to take time to chamber around if we get shot at. So my company commander politely said no to the request. And while he could have folded to the senior leader, he stood up for his soldiers, regardless of how it may have looked to his personal career. You know, this is a soldier's first mentality. It is vital what makes our leaders great. Slide. Story 3, focus on hard work. You know, the conventional army is built on top-down driven orders. However, in a counterinsurgency environment like we faced in Iraq and Afghanistan, it requires a lot of bottom-up input and refinement, something that our army wasn't particularly focused or training for in 2005. You know, rather than sit there and wait for guidance that wasn't coming, Captain Brannon had us work hard developing the intelligence picture at the lowest level and running the company, essentially creating a sub-intelligence section within the company. No one told him to do this. He just took initiative. Fast forward, it's March 16th, 2006. One of our soldiers, Corporal Niall Yates, picture up there, is killed by a sniper's bullet. The round impacted just above the plate. So you have, if you never wore body armor before, there's a hard part, a ceramic plate that absorbs like 7.62 rounds, essentially larger caliber ammunition. Then there's soft body armor, which will stop small things like shrapnel and 9mm ammunition. The bullet impacted about an inch too high. An inch lower, his plate would have stopped it. But it went through the soft body armor, straight through his back, you know, hitting his spinal cord, basically died instantly. The video of him being killed and shot by a sniper's bullet was posted online. I've watched the video once and the image is burned into my brain. It feels like I've seen it 100 times. Over the next 2 months, we tracked, hunted, and ultimately killed or captured everyone associated with the sniper attack. At that time, it felt like the most valuable thing I've ever accomplished in my life. So what was the leadership lesson here? I could probably do a separate speech just on this incident, but they all revolve around one thing: consistent hard work. If you want your soldiers to work hard, show them you're willing to work hard too, AKA lead by example. 2, take initiative. And 3, when you feel like you've done enough, keep working, because you never know what action you're taking that might make the difference between saving a soldier's life. The 2 months of avenging Corporal Niall Yates' death still feel like the hardest working 2 months of my life, which makes the rest of my life feel easy. Former President and General Eisenhower said, "Leadership is the art of getting someone to do something you want done because he wants to do it." Captain Brannon was that type of leader, and I would walk through fire for. And that quote describes the leadership he had over our company. Slide. So I talked about superior officers. I talked about my peers. Talked about my squad leaders or the subordinate leaders. You know, so with that, I bring you to my next deployment, 14 months in the city of Mahmudiya, Iraq, the first major city south of Baghdad. Again, with no train up, I was on to my next deployment. I got moved from battalion to platoon, a battalion staff to a platoon leader. I met my senior NCOs in Mahmudiya after showing up late because of Special Forces Assessment Selection. My NCOs were a bit standoffish because a new officer had just shown up to take their platoon. But they're the rocks that made my platoon strong. They didn't always agree with all my decisions, and I wasn't 100% right all the time, but they always provided honest feedback. Sometimes I changed my mind based off their input, and other times I overruled them based off a combination of situation, intelligence reports, and personal experience from a volatile year in Samarra. Slide. It's hard to say. When our lead vehicle rolled into a canal, I was the first to run out to try to save 4 of our soldiers from drowning. So we were going for a raid just south of the base. 4 vehicles in a line. I'm in vehicle 2. Vehicle 1, we're driving blackout, so we're primarily driving using night vision goggles and very little light. So our first vehicle goes to cross a canal about a block from the target and takes the turn too wide, and it drives directly into a canal. If you've ever been to Iraq or the Middle East, the canals there are not freshwater canals. It is essentially wastewater. So they drove in, and this vehicle plunges into the water upside down and is filling with wastewater. It's hard to see. But this is a Humvee upside down. That is a Humvee mostly inverted. So it rolls in. My driver yells roll over. I pop the door. I go sprinting out. My squad leader, Sergeant Rauch, from another vehicle back, runs out. He runs out. I jump on top of the vehicle, try to get the door open from the top. My squad leader jumps into the water and is essentially swimming through wastewater, trying to get them out from the bottom. And I go to pull the door open, but the door's upside down, which means the way the handle opens is upside down, and my brain isn't processing that right. So I essentially tried to deadlift an immovable object twice in a row. Side note, I woke up the next morning and I was sore from the top of my head to the bottoms of my hamstrings because I was pulling as hard as I physically could. But on the third, when I go to reach down for the third attempt, the door pops open an inch, jam my fingers in, pull the door open, and staring up at me is Sergeant Garrison and the rest of his team there. So 4 people in the Humvee, they were in the only pocket of air left in the corner of the Humvee. If we had a 5th person in there, I don't think there's room for a 5th person. I think the 5th person would have been underwater. And so literally almost had 4 guys in my platoon drown. So what do? Climb out of the vehicle, load into the remaining 2 trucks, keep 1 truck as overwatch, and we go conduct the raid. Even though we had 1 truck out of commission, a machine gun stuck in the mud, and 4 guys who had literally almost died about 10 seconds prior. So we went on the raid. It was a dry hole. Side note, slide. So my squad leaders, Sergeant Rauch, Sergeant Garrison, Sergeant Monologo, are all what made my platoon successful and the reason we came back alive. They're the ones who led from the front in many circumstances, assaulting buildings we received direct fire from. They're the ones who spotted the IED that almost set my vehicle on fire. They're the ones who found the caches we pulled out of the ground, some of which you can see in the pictures on the screen. They're the ones who made the deployment what it was. I question the validity of any leader who doesn't acknowledge the importance of their subordinate leaders and the United States Army's NCO Corps. General Eisenhower knew this when he said, leadership consists of nothing but taking responsibility for everything that goes wrong and giving those who you lead credit for everything that goes right. And that's not just lip service. It's the truth. You won't get anywhere without the support of your subordinates. After traveling through the Middle East to Qatar, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, and Lebanon, I can tell you firsthand, I've never seen NCOs like American NCOs. They are built to lead, provide honest feedback, and whether they are in the desert of Iraq, fighting in Korea, storming the beaches of Normandy, they have no problem leading troops to mission success. My final source of leadership inspiration comes from people I define as legends. When looking to who I would pick for this last part, I had a couple different options. I could have gone with my dad, who's a personal legend to me, but I feel that less connection to some of the people in the audience. I could have gone with my godfather, the man who baptized me, who was a Port Authority police officer. He responded to September 11th and was in the North Tower when the South Tower collapsed. He survived. 37 of his Port Authority police officer coworkers did not. I could have gone with Sergeant Major Earl Plumley. Earl and I were in the Q course together, the Special Forces Qualification course. He was part of the 12-man detachment we did a final training exercise with. He went on to win the Medal of Honor. So I've been blessed to be around such amazing people that provide a source of inspiration. However, for this slide, I decided to go with Joseph and Shannon Kent. You can see Shannon and Joe in the top corner there at some sort of formal military function. And you can see Joe, he's the one in the middle, standing in front of the cross sabers. I'm right next to him. And there's another close-up of Joe. So as a Special Forces team leader, Joe Kent was my warrant officer. Shannon, on the other hand, was someone who I've only met once. Yeah, I consider Joe Kent to be the most accomplished SF soldier I know personally. During the Iraq War, he spent half of the war in Iraq. It was 5 years, 5 cumulative years in Iraq. And that doesn't count a deployment to Yemen. He was always gone. He was always out there fighting. Smart, articulate, and willing to stand up for what he believes, regardless of the consequences, often at the displeasure of other senior leaders. As a young SF officer, he was everything I wanted to be. His career looks like an operator's dream, starting in Ranger Battalion, going to a Special Forces group, then off to another Special Mission Unit, and finally the CIA. Slide. While in the Special Mission Unit, he met his future wife, Shannon Kent. Keep in mind, this is the mid-2010s, before females were allowed in all jobs in the military. We had female operators doing special operations mission in harm's way before it was common public knowledge. Shannon and Joe married and had a son. I happened to be in Northern Virginia during that time, visiting some family. So I got to visit them in their home after being home for the hospital for less than 72 hours. Shannon and Joe would have to go on to have one more baby in the next couple of years. Despite having cancer, Shannon I'm talking about, and a packed military career, she deployed one more time to Syria in 2018. Slide. On January 19th, Shannon was killed by a suicide bomber along with 2 other operators. When it comes to sacrifice, I don't know anyone personally that has sacrificed more than the Kents based off time, effort, and ultimately one of their lives. As Americans prepared for the invasion of D-Day, General Eisenhower said, "You're about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle." While soldiers like Joe and Shannon weren't at D-Day, they are cut from the same cloth of the men who stormed those beaches. To use a pop culture term from my childhood, I consider Joe and Shannon Kent to be real-life GI Joes. And it shows no matter how good you are, if you keep putting yourself in harm's way, sometimes probability and time catches up with you. Slide. While I've talked primarily about great leaders in my career, I'd be remiss not to mention the Army has some bad ones as well. Unfortunately, I've experienced this firsthand on numerous occasions. I've learned almost as much from the bad leaders and the things I saw that I didn't like, as I watched unit cohesion eroded as leaders were self-serving and ran their soldiers into the ground for their own career advancement. It happens. The Army and its leaders are not perfect. However, rather than focus on them, I took the time today to focus on the leaders I did find inspiring. I took the lessons I learned from the bad leaders and made sure to avoid those similar mistakes in my own career path. I've primarily talked about leadership at the tactical level because that's where most of my personal experience resides. The leadership to lead divisions, corps, and Army groups has a lot of common themes, but often requires making hard choices. Leaders like Eisenhower had to be willing to order soldiers into the hardest fighting the world has ever seen, day after day, month after month, and year after year. It requires a level of commitment, belief, and mental fortitude that is hard to come by. However, it is necessary and important, and perhaps one of the reasons I'm standing before you speaking English instead of German. You can't win battles and can't take care of every unit and every soldier on every battlefield. To win, it requires sacrifice. Slide. The 1st Infantry Division's motto is no mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great. And I think that sums it up pretty well. While my generation had to make sacrifices, it pales in comparison to the sacrifices made by those who came before us, like those in Vietnam and World War II. Part of me feels like I can never do enough to live up to their example. However, I also understand that the work our leaders, nation, and veterans did before us is the reason I don't have to sacrifice as much. Likewise, I hope the sacrifices of my generation Likewise, I hope the sacrifice my generation had to make will look much greater in hindsight to the sacrifices of the next generation. Leadership is a complicated subject, and it remains a lot easier to pontificate about than execute in practice. It's a lot easier to make a decision in garrison when the worst that usually happens is someone gets upset than when someone's life is on the line. While the Army does not have an exclusivity on great leaders, it does give the opportunities for seemingly average men and women to rise to the challenge. With that, I thank you for having me here today and open it up to any questions. Slide.
All right, thank you so much. We are taking questions from both our online speaker or online viewer, and our in-person audience. So if you have a question, go ahead and stand up and let us know. I'll see if I can grab one.
I'll ask a question. You say that the Army is inherently top down, but at the same time, you've indicated that one of the best aspects of the Army is being able to organize from the bottom up.
Yeah.
How do you balance those two things? Because obviously you can't have the lowest level soldier saying, no, I'm not going to do that, and give you a direct order. At the same time, you have to be able to innovate it, and perhaps that's what we're seeing in Ukraine. But there's a lot of innovation going on one side, and they're kind of feedback. The Army thought was going to roll over them. They're probably so very top down. How do you balance top down versus bottom up?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's really unit. Oh, okay, sorry. The question was kind of how do you balance top down driven military and bottom up driven military? So depending on it's kind of a summary of the question. Again, it depends on the unit. It depends on the mission. Depends on the country, it depends on the time. So obviously World War II, right? That's got to be top down driven, and that's what we needed at that time, because you need soldiers who are like, I need you to storm those beaches. I need you to take that town. No questions asked. You got to do it. For some of the Afghanistan, Iraq stuff is more bottom up, and there's no right answer. There's no easy answer. With conventional forces for like 1st Infantry Division, it's a lot. It makes a lot of sense for a lot of that stuff to be top down driven because of the mission sets they'll face. For special forces, which is largely my background, a lot of that has to be bottom up driven because we were in countries operating as a 12-man team and essentially had no other guidance besides like conduct special operations. Like that's my mission statement would be like conduct special operations, period. And we like that because it gives us maximum latitude to accomplish that. How do you balance it? Whew. There's no good answer. It's you need to look at the situation. You need to look at the type of unit you're in. You need to look at the type of leaders you have. Some leaders will not do well in that bottom up driven environment, and some leaders will not do well in the top down, like super heavy top down driven environment. So it's really just a matter of as you go through the planning process, doing mission analysis. You use a big Army term, military decision making process. As you go through that, figuring out what works best for the situation. One of the things we like to do is you try to create buy-in from the bottom up, because then people feel like they own the plan. So for example, for when we plan a mission, we're like, all right, we're going to do this mission. We're going to break into 3 different groups. This is like a 12-man team. I want one group to plan for airborne insertion and, walking out of the objective. One group to plan for vehicle insertion, helicopters out of the objective. Third group, do whatever you want for infill and exfil. In the first group, I want you to attack from the north. Second group, attack from the south. Third group, attack from any direction you want. So it allows us to, our top-down directive was conduct this raid. The bottom-up refinement is we're figuring out exactly how we're going to do it. And then when those three groups present their case, we typically end up doing like a mishmash and combine it. So everyone feels like they had some sort of buy-in, and we usually get better ideas before actually conducting the mission. Again, that's more like a tactical level example, but I think it kind of sends the idea. Complicated answer. Good question. Yeah, I appreciate the question.
Do you have any more from the audience? Joy, questions online?
So far, I don't have any.
That means you did an excellent job.
Oh, thank you.
One quick question, who blew up the mosque?
Good question. It's a good question. So the major news put out, it was Zarqawi, AMZ, I can't remember, it's Ahmed Musab al-Zarqawi. That was like who that kind of orchestrated it from the top level. At a lower level, like the name, that was what the news was putting out, CNN, Fox News, et cetera. On our level, it was a man named Haitham Sabah. We ended up not capturing before the end of that deployment. I'm not sure what happened to him, but because there's multiple levels. There's like Zarqawi, probably the one who like told him to blow it up. Haitham Sabah was probably one of the lower level guys who actually like helped coordinate at a lower level. Then there was guys who actually went in there and implanted explosives. So
Why?
I think primarily to help kind of stoke the fire of a sectarian war. So Samarra is primarily a Sunni city. So it's like 90% Sunni, like 10% Shia. The mosque is actually a Shia shrine in a Sunni city, which is very bizarre. So it blew up, and the local mosques were putting out like, the Jews blew up the mosque. I was like, the Jews blew up the mosque. It's like, there's no, it's like, do you see guys with like the curls and the hats walking around here? I'm so confused. But that's what they were putting out on the day of the bomb, because they were all broadcasting. And there was rumors that the Sadr army, so Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia militia leader, was going to bring an army into Samarra and essentially start killing people. That ended up not happening, but it sent a large parts of the rest of Iraq into like, I'm going to use the term civil war. They were kind of already at a civil war at that point, but it spiked violence post-February 2006. So I think that was their main, goal was to destabilize things. And it's a Shia shrine. The government of Iraq at the time was primarily Shia. So it was probably a way to kind of poke at them and try to aggravate them.
Yeah, I do have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
In the chat. The comment says, "Thank you for your service. We are a grateful nation." And it's from Sheridan B. Now it says, "P.S. My buddy Frank appreciates you too."
Thank you.
And then the question is, how did your Army training prepare you mentally and physically for ultra racing?
Yeah. So as I mentioned briefly, like my other job is ultra distance obstacle course racing. The way that it prepares me for that is, so there's no quit option in the military, right? Like if I go on a patrol and someone starts shooting at me, I can't be like, nah, like I'm not feeling it today. You're like, why don't we stop, time out, and we'll come back and we'll start this firefight again tomorrow when I'm feeling a little better. So I use the same mentality when going into these like extreme endurance events, 5 hour, 12 hour, 24 hour, where, I have three options as I'm going through the course. I can speed up, I can slow down, or I can maintain the same pace. It's my only three options. Doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter how you're doing on placement. You can speed up, slow down, or maintain the same pace. So when I go into a race, I go with that mentality of kind of always moving forward. And the military has, drilled that into my head that mission success like has to happen. There's no other option into my brain. And then on top of that, through like special forces selection and Ranger school, I've seen people do things that I thought, if you explain them to me on paper, I'd be like, no, that is a physical impossibility. People cannot do that. They can't move 200 pounds of equipment plus their 50-pound backpacks plus their weapons through sand for 6 miles. Like you can't, it can't be done. But I've seen guys do it repeatedly over and over again. Happens every month at selection in North Carolina. And, just a lot of inspiring people who just don't take no or like, mission failure as an option. And I apply the same thing to racing. Doesn't mean every race goes well, but I'll get to the finish line or I'll black out on the way there and you'll have to carry me off. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So my question is, you talked about some humans are good leaders and some humans are not inherently good leaders, but it is a learnable trait.
Absolutely.
What does the Army do to help people who might be deficient in leadership? What sort of educational programs do they have?
Yeah, so a lot of that comes through your professional schooling, kind of what, that first or second slide, the first couple of slides is kind of where a lot of that resides. So, obviously there's the books you have to read, the doctrine you're supposed to read. When I was in ROTC, we had a leadership class and we actually read through whatever the version of 6-22 was at the time. It's changed since I graduated from college, but we actually read through that program. We'd talk through, we'd go through vignettes. And then, through the training course, they'll rotate who's in charge. So sometimes it's in a tactical environment. So they use something called sticks lanes, essentially small unit tactics lanes where you practice doing a raid or ambush and they rotate who's in charge. And that's not just for infantry people, that's for everyone. Logisticians will go through that training. Cooks will go through that. It's for everyone because it's using infantry tactics as a primary basis to evaluate leadership. And that really helps you, being in charge helps you understand what to do, but also being a subordinate helps you understand what to do, because as a subordinate, you'll be on a mission for training and you'll be like, no one is telling me what's going on. Like, this is super annoying. Like, are we still walking? Why are we still walking? Like, how far are we from the objective? So you quickly figure out like, all right, if you're in charge, you need to tell your people what's going on because they get frustrated really quickly. So there's training environments like that. We have, once you get to your unit, I just happened to fall into a weird cycle where I showed up and they put me on a plane right away. Normally you go through a train up and starts at the team level and then you do squad and then you do platoon, then you do company, then you do battalion, and then you send the entire brigade to one of our 2 stateside training centers, National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California, or Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk, Louisiana, where they do brigade level training. And that kind of brings it all together, working to more of a large scale type operation. And then finally, which the part I talked about the most is just paying attention. The Army changes out leaders about every 1 to 2 years, depending on what position you're in. So you'll get exposed to a lot of leaders. I feel like I've seen so many at this point in my career. I've been in for 18 years. So you just see a lot and you'll start paying attention, taking notes, either physically or mentally, and using that to develop your own leadership style. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Doesn't seem like we have any other questions. So before we call it a day, we just have a few announcements that we'd like to make. Firstly, we want to say thank you to the Eisenhower Foundation and the Jeffcoat Foundation, of which we would not be able to put on these programs. They sponsor our programs, and we are appreciative of that. So please thank you to them. Secondly, I do want to tell you about some of our upcoming programs. For July, we have our book club. Our next book club will be July 12th. We will welcome Dr. Carmelita Williams, who will talk to us about the book Servants of the People, the 1960s Legacy of African American Leadership by Leah E. Williams. That will be completely virtual. So please join us if you can. As well, on July 28th, we welcome Dave Nichols, who's going to talk to us about Eisenhower's leadership premises and gifts. While he will be joining us virtually, we will have the space open for you to join us in person if you would like. And that is it for us. If you don't have any other questions or comments, we will call it a day. Don, did you want to have something? Okay. For those of you who are in person, if you didn't get something to eat, please grab a box on your way out. If you did get something to eat, please grab a box on your way out. And you all have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, and thank you for coming.